The blue and red light splashed across the wooden walls of the cabin, creating eerie shadows that stretched and twisted in the early morning dark. I stood quietly on the porch, coffee mug warming my hand, as two police officers made their way toward me. Behind them stood a woman in her 50s, arms crossed in smug satisfaction. Dressed in a beige pantsuit that practically shouted, "Middle management," her highlighted bob haircut bounced with every sharp motion she made toward my cabin. She radiated the kind of authority people grant themselves after too many committee meetings and too few real problems. Her voice, sharp enough to slice steel, rang out through the still air as she made her case to the officers. She claimed the cabin was abandoned, that I had broken in during the night, and that she, president of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, knew every legitimate homeowner in the neighborhood. She insisted I was a trespasser. The taller officer, with silver just beginning to edge into his temples, stepped forward with measured professionalism. He asked for my identification, calm but alert. I reached for my wallet and handed him my driver's license, along with another card tucked discreetly behind it. As he examined them under the flashlight's beam, his partner paced the porch, inspecting for signs of forced entry, none of which he would find. The officer's eyes paused on the second card. His brows lifted almost imperceptibly. He glanced at me, then the card, then finally at the woman still tapping her foot like a ticking clock. Turning to her, his voice took on a different weight. He informed her, calmly but firmly, that I was Daniel Morrison, Senior Compliance Officer for the State Real Estate Commission. The transformation was instant. Color drained from her face like the last drop of wine from an empty glass. Just days earlier, everything had seemed so routine. My mother had called to tell me that Uncle Robert had passed away. Along with the grief came the startling news that he'd left me his lakeside cabin in Pine Ridge Estates. It had been nearly 2 decades since I last saw it, just once, when I was a teenager, but the memory of its charm had stayed with me. The attorney handling the estate assured me the property taxes were paid, the deed had been transferred, and the keys were on their way. After months buried in bureaucratic casework, I saw a weekend escape not just as a break, but as something close to sacred. The 3-hour drive wound through forested hills and mountain passes, offering a kind of healing I hadn't realized I needed. When I arrived at sunset, the cabin stood like a forgotten postcard from a quieter time, cozy, with knotty pine walls and a fireplace that still held the ghost of old smoke. I lit a fire, unpacked a few supplies, poured a glass of wine, and cracked open a book. By 10 p.m., I was asleep, cradled by the soft sounds of crickets and the lake brushing the shoreline. The peace shattered at 7 a.m. with a pounding on the door, loud and insistent, not the kind of knock that suggested patience. Still groggy and half-dressed, I opened the door to a woman with a clipboard and the tight-lipped expression of someone who viewed strangers as a threat to order. She stood there radiating righteous indignation, declaring that I had no right to be on the property. Her name was Linda Garrison, she said, HOA president and self-appointed guardian of neighborhood purity. She explained in clipped tones that no one could simply move in without HOA approval, background checks, and a $500 transfer fee. I tried to explain, calmly, that I wasn't moving in. I was the rightful owner. My uncle had left the cabin to me, and I had both the deed and the keys. But she wasn't listening. To her, I was chaos incarnate, a breach in the fortress of bylaws and protocols. She waved her clipboard like a weapon, listing everything I had failed to do: no application, no fee, no orientation packet. I leaned in the doorway, heavy with fatigue and aching for caffeine, barely able to hide my disbelief. I didn't need an introduction to the community. I owned the damn cabin. Spending one night at my own cabin, one I legally owned, hardly seemed like a crime worthy of police involvement. I reminded her of that, keeping my tone level despite the rising tension. I didn't need anyone's approval, certainly not the HOA's, to sleep in my own bed. But that only seemed to stoke her fire. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. "How dare you take that tone with me," she snapped. "I've been the president of this HOA for 12 years. I built the standards here. I will not be disrespected by some city person who thinks he can just waltz in and ignore our rules. I stayed calm. It was part of the job. Years in regulatory work had taught me how to respond to outrage with quiet firmness. I'm not ignoring anything, I said, carefully. I'm simply exercising my property rights. With that, I turned to head inside, coffee now my top priority. But before the door could close, she jammed her foot into the threshold like she was stopping a crime in progress. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll be hearing from our HOA attorney. And if you're still here tonight, I will call the police. Again. For trespassing." Without another word, she pulled her clipboard to her chest like a shield and stormed off the porch, heels crunching against the gravel as she vanished into the trees. I stood for a moment, watching the dust trail settle, then made a mental note to review the HOA bylaws of Pine Ridge Estates. I'd dealt with overreaching HOA board members before, but Linda Garrison was on a different level, a true zealot for suburban order. The rest of the day unfolded with a welcome contrast. I spent the morning sorting through some of Uncle Robert's belongings, taking stock of the memories tucked away in drawers and dusty cabinets. By midday, I'd launched a kayak onto the glimmering lake, the quiet water offering a rare kind of stillness I hadn't felt in months. A few neighbors strolled by as I cleaned up the yard, offering condolences and casual conversation. To my relief, none of them mentioned needing any sort of HOA approval. In fact, several had a knowing smirk when I brought up the woman from earlier. "Oh, you met Linda," said Tom, who lived 2 cabins down and had a grin like someone sharing a local inside joke. "She's dedicated. Tried to fine me once for staining my deck with the wrong shade of brown. Had to show her the actual paint can with the code to prove it matched the approved color list. That woman's got a rulebook for a heartbeat." That evening, I grilled burgers on the deck, the lake bathed in streaks of orange and purple as the sun slipped behind the pines. It was exactly the kind of quiet night I'd hoped for when I decided to come here. But as the sky darkened, twin beams of headlights crept up the gravel driveway. Again. 2 police cruisers this time. I stepped out to meet them, still holding the same coffee mug from dinner, its warmth now more for comfort than caffeine. And just like that, I was back in the chaos, though this time with a twist. Linda was already on the scene, standing tall with that same smug expression, ready to put on a show. But as soon as the lead officer reviewed my ID and glanced at the second card tucked behind it, something shifted. His demeanor changed. Recognition sparked in his eyes. He looked from me to Linda, then back to the card before returning my documents. "Ma'am," he said, addressing her with deliberate calm, "can you explain exactly what crime is being reported here?" Linda stumbled at first, caught off guard. But then her voice returned, shrill and urgent. "He's trespassing. This property requires HOA authorization for occupancy, and he doesn't have it." The officer blinked, then spoke slowly, as if explaining something to a particularly stubborn child. "Ma'am, he owns the property. You can't trespass on your own land." She wasn't done. "The HOA has rules. He hasn't paid the required fees, submitted the proper applications." "Those are civil issues, not criminal," interrupted the second officer. His voice was firmer now, with the hint of irritation. "You called 911 and reported a burglary in progress. That's a serious accusation." I decided it was time to step in. "Officers," I said evenly, "I'm happy to provide the deed, estate documents, everything's properly filed with the county. All taxes are current." The lead officer waved it off politely. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Morrison. We know who you are. My captain actually attended your seminar on property law compliance last spring." He turned back to Linda, the tone of the encounter now fully reversed. "Ma'am, are you aware that filing a false police report is a crime?" Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land, gasping for a reply. I didn't file a false report. He's not supposed to be here without HOA approval." But he's not burglarizing anything, the officer responded, his patience visibly fraying. He owns the home. These are HOA disputes, not police matters. I watched as the weight of the situation began to register on her face. In her zeal to enforce the rules, Linda Garrison had just accused a senior state compliance officer of a felony. The irony was almost too perfect. "Officers," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I appreciate your professionalism and quick response. But I'd like to file a formal complaint. I was woken in my own home, again, by police due to a false burglary report. This is the second incident today involving Miss Garrison harassing me about my legal right to be here." The lead officer gave a grim nod and retrieved his notebook. "We'll need statements from both parties. Mr. Morrison, would you like to press charges for filing a false report?" I glanced at Linda. Her defiance had vanished, replaced by an almost translucent pallor. She looked like she might collapse. "You can't be serious," she said faintly. "I'm the HOA president. I was protecting the community. From its lawful property owners." I asked, one eyebrow raised. The next hour passed in interviews and documentation. Linda grew increasingly frantic, making call after call, her husband, someone she claimed was their HOA attorney, and at least. She made 3 more phone calls as the officers took our statements, each one more frantic than the last. Board members, legal advisors, anyone she thought might be able to pull her out of the hole she'd dug herself into. But her voice, once so authoritative and clipped, now trembled with desperation. As the officers prepared to leave, the lead officer handed me his card. "If you need anything else for your formal complaint, Mr. Morrison, don't hesitate to reach out," he said, his tone professional but unmistakably firm. "We take false reports very seriously, especially when they're weaponized to harass legitimate property owners." He turned to Linda and added, "Ma'am, I suggest you take some time to familiarize yourself with actual property law before making any more emergency calls." With the patrol cars gone and the quiet of the lake returning, Linda lingered awkwardly in my driveway, noticeably smaller than she'd appeared that morning. Her shoulders drooped, her bravado gone. "You're not really going to file a complaint, are you?" she asked, her voice no longer sharp but tentative, even pleading. "I was just doing my job." I met her gaze. "Your job is to manage legitimate HOA business," I said evenly. "Not to harass homeowners or abuse emergency services. I'll be reviewing your HOA documents and bylaws thoroughly. I suggest you do the same." The next morning, I filed the complaint, official and by the book, before driving back to the city. But that wasn't the end of it. Back in my office, I pulled up Pine Ridge Estates' file. What I found wasn't just concerning, it was a pattern. Complaints stretching back years. Allegations of overreach, strange fine structures, and meetings that hadn't been properly announced. Linda's rule had left behind more than annoyed neighbors, it left a paper trail. Within days, I scheduled a full audit of the HOA, authorized under state law. All HOAs are required to maintain certain operational standards, financial transparency, due process in enforcement, democratic board elections, and above all, respect for property rights. From what I was seeing, Pine Ridge had been skating far too close to the edge for years. The audit confirmed it all. Improper election procedures. Missing financial disclosures. A consistent pattern of intimidating homeowners who dared to question her authority. The state issued a formal notice of violation with an order for immediate corrective action. But the real reckoning came 3 weeks later at the emergency HOA meeting. Word had spread like wildfire about the false police report, the state audit, and the long trail of abuse. The community, once intimidated into silence, finally had its moment. One by one, homeowners stood up to speak. Stories poured out. Fines issued over mailbox paint. Harassment over yard signs. The vote to remove Linda from the board was swift and unanimous, except for one lone dissenting vote. Hers. I attended the meeting as both a homeowner and a state official. Watching Linda Garrison standing at the podium, gavel clutched like a lifeline, was surreal. As the secretary read the final tally, her face drained of color. Her 12-year reign over Pine Ridge Estates ended not with defiance, but with disbelief. "This is illegal," she shouted as Tom, yes, Tom with the infamous deck stain, calmly asked her to step down. "You can't do this. I've given my life to this community." "The vote has been counted, Linda," Tom said, gently but firmly. "It's time." Security had to escort her out. Her protests echoed through the room, but they carried no weight anymore. The last I saw of her that night, she was standing in the parking lot, still clutching her clipboard, a deposed queen without a court. In the end, she faced a $5,000 fine and 200 hours of community service for filing a false police report. Her HOA insurance, wary of liability, refused to cover her legal fees. I heard through the grapevine that she had to take out a second mortgage just to cover the attorney costs. But the real impact came later, 6 months later, when I was appointed to develop new state protocols for HOA governance. We named them the Morrison Protocols. Designed to curb abuses of power, the guidelines established strict standards for board conduct and codified protections for homeowners. Ironically, Linda's attempt to intimidate me ended up protecting thousands of residents across the state. I still visit the cabin often. It's peaceful now. Every so often, I see Linda walking her Pomeranian down the street. She lives 3 blocks over, but she never makes eye contact. Never waves. Certainly never mentions HOA business. Tom's now the board president, and he runs things with a lighter hand. Less clipboard, more community barbecues. Last week, I received notice about the annual HOA compliance review. And here's the twist: as the official overseeing Pine Ridge Estates under the new guidelines, I get to ensure they're following every rule, to the letter. The irony isn't lost on me, or on Linda, I'm sure. I hear she turns pale every time my name is mentioned at a meeting. The $5,000 fine probably stung. But knowing she now has to live under the very protocols her actions helped inspire. That, my friend, is priceless.